This is the Losses Become Gains podcast, the podcast that talks about and normalizes the complexities of grief, life after loss, and all this entails. I'm your host, Tara Accardo. I'm a grief and transformational life coach, and I'm here to serve you guidance, tangible tools, and inspiration to help you cultivate a more meaningful, intentional, and beautiful life. A life where you'll discover gains from your losses and so much more. I'm so grateful you're here. Let's dive right in. Welcome back to the Losses Become Gains podcast, you guys. I'm your host, Tara Accardo. I am thrilled to share the stage today with filmmaker, actor, singer, and certified grief educator, Garry. This is such a unique episode today. I cannot wait to dig into this conversation with you. Grant is the director of the documentary Meet Me Where I Am, which explores the topic of grief through individual stories of loss, love, and hope. It also focuses on how to be there, so to speak, for grievers, what to do and what to say, what to not do and what to not say, and features some really incredible people and voices in the grief space, and even some famous faces that you would recognize that are all being brutally honest and open with their grief and their grief journey, which is so refreshing. I cannot even tell you. And I was lucky enough to get a little sneak preview of this film, and I genuinely loved this documentary so much. I might have shed a tear or five, but they were ultimately happy tears, I promise. So you are going to want to not only see this when it is made available, but also share it with friends and family and your network because it addresses topics and situations that truly need to be recognized and discussed more. And I am so here for it. And it is so encouraging to see what Grant is doing here in directing this highly needed film to help normalize grief. That is very much my mission as well. And this conversation today is so needed, in my opinion. And I think Grant and his team and everyone that worked on this film has done such a beautiful job. And he has such a unique perspective on grief, having been a part of this filmmaking process. So without further ado, I really hope you enjoy it and that it resonates with you. Let's dive right in. To kick this off, and before we even get more into the griefy stuff, I would love for you to just tell us a little bit about who you are, kind of outside of grief and this whole process, which I definitely want to dig into. But, you're a filmmaker, but also an actor, a very talented singer, certified grief educator. So just talk to me a little bit about who you are and your journey to where.
Yeah, thank you. You touched on it. I definitely consider myself multi-passionate. And I, when I was growing up, I was always into acting and being in plays and singing. However, I never really considered myself a singer until more recently. I just always liked it, and it was something I was passionate about. Mm-hmm. But I would say that during the pandemic, I spent a lot of time alone and in pain, and really finding my voice, for lack of a better term.
Oh, love that.
So, yeah, and so I found a lot of joy in the midst of pain, singing, performing, storytelling, and then eventually making this film. I studied theater in school. My degree is in theater, and then after I graduated, I went on to work in film and TV a little bit here and there, and independent filmmaking, and found myself these last few years working on this documentary, which I had also never really considered myself a documentary filmmaker. I was always more of a narrative person, and I also love musicals, and so that wasn't really an area that I was even thinking about until I realized how much I love having long form conversations with other humans.
Yeah.
And so it's been a wonderful experience for me to do this film, and I'm very excited to share it with the world. Um, did that sort of answer your question?
It did, yeah. And then anything else, just what do you kind of enjoy doing in your spare time and things like that? I always like to kind of get to know people outside of the grief realm. You know what I mean?
Yeah, spare time. I love getting coffee in the mornings. I
Mhm.
actually like I'm a very early riser. So I like waking up 5, 6 in the morning,
Mhm.
um, take the dog out before anybody's up. I don't put the news on in the morning. I don't watch the morning news because I have found that it's not necessarily the
It
best.
does not always start your day off on the right foot.
Well,
That's for sure.
and it doesn't even like I feel like it doesn't even matter like what your sort of belief systems are. It doesn't really make anyone happy. I mean, you hear people on both sides of like the political spectrum even just say like, oh, the media is the worst. And it's like, well, so it's not really helping any of us feel good.
Yeah.
And how can we feel good at the start of our day? So
I love that.
I I typically um my sort of ritual, if you want to call it that, is, making a cup of coffee,
Mhm.
um, um, and reading in the morning. And I usually read nonfiction.
Mhm.
I'm a sucker for like self-help books and
Oh my
stuff,
God, same. Yes.
even though seldom do they really offer anything in the midst of deep grief. But that's, regardless, I'm still just
It plants
someone
some
that
seeds, right? Like it can
yeah,
at least, that's kind of how
yeah,
I felt about self-help too. It's just like it's food for thought and it's something I kind
right.
of keep in the back of my head and I'm like, oh, that's a good point.
What
Like,
Yeah, and I've found that it can be profoundly helpful just for like more daily life sort of things, maybe
yeah,
pertaining to like career and other like goals and aspirations in life.
absolutely.
um so yeah, I mean, I do that. I like going to the gym. And I'm a big foodie, so you can always find me eating something that I probably shouldn't be eating.
Love it.
So
You only live once, right?
there's a yeah, it's just there's yeah, it's sort of a um I try and stay healthy and fit, and then I also like eating a large
Balance.
amounts of food. So yeah,
Yeah. It's all about
yeah,
balance.
life, yeah. So and and then of course, as I mentioned, singing. I love singing in my
Mhm.
spare time. So
That's amazing.
um
That definitely
that's
answered my question. And I'm actually so glad I probed more on this because what you touched on here is I think is so important. And this is a message that I want any grievers listening here today to take into account is having a good routine in the morning. And this can look like whatever you want, but I think just again, this concept of just getting off our day on the right foot with just a little spark of joy, a little hope, a little,
mhm,
positivity can make such a difference. And I've said this before, like I think going to sleep can be the hardest for people because your thoughts are just so loud and it's just falling asleep can feel impossible, all the things. But then getting up is also one of the worst times because you're hit continuously day after day with the reality of whoever or whatever you've lost. And that can be really, really challenging. So, like, whatever, journaling or exactly what you were saying, I think exercise is important, getting out for a walk. I mean, whatever this looks like for the individual, I think just having something
mhm.
and that can start with just 5 minutes of one thing if that just seems overwhelming, right? It doesn't have to be some 8-step regimen. But
Right.
the coffee, I'm with you on that. Like, and for me, it's more almost like I don't even need the caffeine. It's just the experience
It's
of
the experience.
yeah.
Yeah.
And like right now, like I can't even have caffeine because I'm pregnant. So I'm just like, okay, I'll do decaf, whatever. But for me, it's more of the just like,
Which, congratulations, by the
thank
way.
you.
It's
I appreciate
very
it. Yeah,
exciting.
that's a whole nother oh God can of worms in the grief
Yeah.
space that I'm in right
We can
now.
talk
But
about that.
yeah, it's just, it's trust there's an episode on it and it's just, it's trippy. It's really trippy
Of
going through
course.
that without parents. But I'm not the only one out there either, you know, and I that's not to diminish or minimize what I'm going through. I
Right.
just say that more from a community aspect. Like, again, anyone
Hmm.
listening here, you're not alone. And we're
Hmm.
all going through major life events without people that we maybe anticipated being there or always
Yeah.
saw there. Weddings, launching a film. I mean, you name it.
Yeah.
But it's crazy because some of the, you know, most incredible things we might ever do in our lives are sometimes a result of our adversity or our losses or whatever. I would have created probably losses become gains had I not lost my parents. Period. Because I wouldn't
Yeah.
know, right? So I don't
I,
know. Do you feel like that's true with your
I,
film, or how does
oh
that
yeah,
translate for
there's
you?
no, yeah. And I say this all the time. There's no way I would have made my film had I not gone through some of the loss that
Yeah,
I've encountered.
yeah,
It was like 100% like throwing my grief into that. I mean, um, I would say that is a loss becoming a gain for me. I don't think I would have made the film prior. Um, so I so I have found meaning in that. Um, I think that well, I want to be careful when I say finding meaning in it, like how you say losses become gains. Like it doesn't replace the
yes.
loss, you know.
Mhm.
Um, and it's more of like how can you move forward with that loss being part of your identity now,
Yeah.
and make new meaning while still holding space for that loss. Um, and
Well
I just think that's important because I don't want to lead anyone in a direction of like, hey, you can get over something if you just do something new and different. That's just not how it works. I think that's an unreasonable expectation when we've had profound loss.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah. It's not particularly realistic, but there is, I think that's an important distinction. So I'm really glad you said that. Yeah. There is a newfound meaning and sense of gratitude for things that we might have taken advantage of before. And so it just kind of makes us, I think, just stop and think and pause and ponder a little
Yeah,
more
and
than
and
we.
it's not discussed enough in that like gratitude and grief
Yeah.
can coexist. Like one doesn't cancel out the other. They can coexist, not necessarily in harmony
Mhm.
all the time, but they can both exist. It's a weird thing that our society just thinks, like, oh, well, you know, you're having this child now, so you should be happy and that's that and you shouldn't
Yeah.
think about, your parents anymore. It just doesn't work that way at all.
And that's the thing about grief that when people might say, shouldn't you be over it by now? Or, oh, it's been a year, these crazy, ridiculous expectations of you should be in a certain place. Number one, that is a them problem, not an us problem. But
Right.
number two, there's so many milestones or not, it doesn't even have to be a big milestone. It can be a day-to-day thing where something might come up that either triggers us or, again, you're going through like a new phase of life that you perhaps thought your person or your people or whoever would be there for, they're not. That can bring up a lot of grief yet again. I mean, that is,
Yeah.
there's like a re-grieving almost in that. And so that's kind of
Yeah.
where I'm at now. Certainly, I mean, that happened when my wedding came up, but then it's happening now. I'm still in shock in a lot of ways. We'll see what happens when she gets here. But like,
Mhm.
and I'm just like, that's, when they say grief isn't linear, there is a reason
It's
that
not.
that is said.
It's not. Yeah, it's not linear at all. And I think we again, we somehow think it is because so many other things are linear or we perceive them as being linear.
Yeah.
And it's not till you're going through it that you realize um, it's simply not. Um, One of the people in the film told me a joke, and it said, a guy, a guy asked someone, "Have you been through the 5 stages of grief?" And they said, "Yes, this morning."
Yes, I
So
love that. Oh my
uh,
God.
you can be going through them in and out, like
Yes.
just it's not a well, as David Kessler says, it's not a prescription. It's not prescriptive. It's rather it's descriptive of what you might go through, and if it works for you, great. And if not, that's not an issue. There's no right or wrong way to do it. And I always try and tell people, find what works for you. And kind of like getting back to like what we were saying earlier with those, like, journaling in the morning, or having, making space for you. I always say, if you make a list of the things that like matter to you, or the things that like will bring you joy, try to do those things. At some point during one of those, you are hit with a moment of grief, then sort of shift to the grief and allow space for the grief. Because I think one of the worst things we can do is turn away from the grief, because it's gonna be there. It's gonna sort of it will get you in some way. So just making space for those feelings as they come up, I've found, is very helpful.
Okay, so I want to transition a little bit here more into the film, and I just want to first preface this by saying that when I watched the trailer, I mean, I was just, there's a lot of things that came up for me. I was just immediately really very touched by it, kind of taken aback a little bit, but I mean that in a good way. It was very just profound, and seeing some of the people that you interviewed almost, I'm going to say stumbled over their words, but I don't mean that in a bad way. It's almost kind of like, how do I even begin expressing how I'm feeling right now? How do I even begin describing this? All the things, how we, even as people in the grief educating space, can even, word sometimes. There's some people that I recognized. There was, emotion that came out that I just, again, felt so profoundly. And so, just that trailer alone was so beautifully done. And so I know people can go see that. So I just have no doubt the rest of the film is complete gold. But so before we get into like the nitty gritty details, like why was it so important for you to create a film like this, really to be able, you've touched on like telling the stories, to help people, not only just with their grief, but take it a step further and kind of find their gains, if you will, to find this meaning and purpose and hope that we all so desperately need.
Well, I want to touch on something else you said first, and I will get into that. When we were in the editing phase and post-production, it was really important for us to edit it in a way that we were in the room with these people, and you do stumble to find the right words in grief. And so as filmmakers, we felt like, well, we could have edited this and made it like super polished to where there was no or moments of not of moments of silence, but we wanted to allow space for that, because that's how it is. That's how it is if you're with somebody in that space. And so we wanted to extend some of these clips where people were just sitting and like thinking about what maybe I had asked them, or thinking about what they said before they were going to say something. And so it was important to have a accurate depiction of grief in the film. And so that's why there are times in the film where people aren't saying anything, or we just kind of sit with them as they sort of gather their thoughts. Moving on, this has been a topic that I've been very passionate about for a long time. I had taken a grief course when I was in college, and that had really opened my eyes to this subject that we all experience, yet we don't talk about it enough. And so when the opportunity came to do this film, I just felt like, now we have a real opportunity to help people here, tell real stories of real people, and a variety of different stories too. Like there were some in there that I really pushed to have in the film, that I thought may resonate with other, maybe some people watching the film hadn't lost a child or hadn't lost a parent, but maybe they had lost a pet, and that perhaps could have been profound loss for them. And so it was important for me to touch on different types of loss. You know, there's only so many that you can fit into such a you know, it's now about an hour and a half. But so it was a challenge to fit those different stories in there too. But I just think one of the biggest things, and I actually I would ask this of you too. One of the things I asked everyone in the film, because I felt like this would help people with language around grief, was, you know, what were some of the things that people did or said to you after your loss that were helpful?
Mm-hmm.
And then on the flip side, I would ask people, you know, what were some of the things that people did or said that perhaps were not so helpful?
Yeah.
And one of the things that people said, you can see it in the film, was when people would say, "My condolences."
Yeah.
And many people felt like, that's not helping me.
Such a cop out.
And it's like, my condolences. Okay, did my part. Done. On with my life.
Moving on.
And you know, it's important, you know, to me to be like, it is hard because, you know, as like you said, like, I'm a grief educator. I did this movie on it. Like I've lived my own grief experiences, and I still struggle to find the right words to say to people because I don't know what they're going through. We don't know what the other person is going through, but what we can understand better is that what they are going through is incredibly painful. What they're going through is very hard and very challenging, and they don't know what they want half the time.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
And so it's just about, you know, it's just about being there for the person, but defining what that means. So it's important, I think, to assess the relationship we have to the individual. You know, maybe a text message to them is sufficient because maybe that's your relationship with that person. But maybe going and sitting with them, holding their hand, or going on a walk with them might be more sufficient depending on the type of relationship you have. So, you know, it was important for me to offer a variety of things in the film that I hope, for lack of a better phrase, non-grievers, people who are not currently grieving, I guess, can take away to help maybe their friends and loved ones, and then also at the same time help people that are currently in grief with their own grief, and that the feelings that they're having are real and normal and valid, and to not shy away from that.
I've learned a lot about love languages in this process too. And I mean, very much with my own relationship, like my now husband and I broke up for a period of time just after my mom, well, a little while after my mom died and just before my dad died. It was like, you know, because I wasn't going through enough already, right?
Right, of course.
But it ended up being a blessing in disguise, and I won't get into that. But he has not experienced deep, profound grief literally ever in his life. And I don't just mean the fact that he hasn't like lost a person. He has just frankly been very blessed in that he just hasn't experienced a ton of adversity or hardship or deep loss of a person. He still has two very happy, healthy parents. I could go on. So for him to try and understand what I was going through when I didn't even understand it myself, because up until that point, I had also been frankly pretty lucky in my, you know, I've lost some people, but I was much younger. I think I processed it differently. I was, you know, when I lost my parents, I was in my late-ish 20s. You know, we talked a little bit about expectations. For me to expect him to understand what I was feeling and going through, not only not being his parents, but like just any of it. And then what to say or what to do. When we eventually did reunite, we talked about that. It was almost like one of our initial conversations of, are we getting back together or not? Because it was like, do you understand where I'm coming from? And do I understand where you're coming from and what each other needs? Because we cannot let this happen again. You know, there's just a total communication breakdown and all of the things. And there's a podcast episode with him on this too, where I get his opinion on it, because I think it's important to have those conversations with, again, for lack of a better term, non-grievers. Because it comes back so much to like, you don't know what you don't know. And some of these people don't know what to say. Or quite frankly, again, if they are kind of mentally trained to handle grief differently, they might think my condolences is just a safe bet. And for some people, it is, like depending on
Sure.
if it's maybe like an acquaintance at work that doesn't really know you, but also doesn't want to just not acknowledge it. I mean,
Right.
fine, there's a time and a place for some of these things. But I think what
Yeah.
you hit the nail on the head, just depending on your relationship with the person, just remembering that what works for us does not always work for other people. I had some of my best friends bombard me with like gifts and stuff, like material things. And I was like, I don't need the material things.
Yeah.
I kind of need to be left
Yep.
alone. I need to be able to just text you something really quick or
Yeah.
just vent on the phone for 20 minutes. And, so I think that's just a really important lesson in grief, is to just come out of our ego a little bit and take a moment to really consider what the person who is going through this traumatic loss really needs. And I've also gotten the question, I'd be curious if you've come across this too, is like, what if you don't know? Should I ask them? Because I think a lot of people don't want to like add on to the griever's plate. They're like, I don't want to be asking them. No, it's okay to ask. Just expect that they might not know. And I think at
Yeah.
that point, it's just continuing to check in, or just, not ad nauseum, but just
Right.
enough to be like, I'm here, I'm thinking of you, you know, or just even almost taking the reins even a step further, maybe, and just volunteering to bring food over or something. That was like the
Hmm.
one thing that my friends did for me. I will say, like a little bit of a meal train when my mom first died. I was barely eating. I didn't even want to eat all the things.
No.
Um,
Yeah.
they just kind of took the reins and did that. And I was so grateful for that. And I didn't even know I needed it at the time. Like I
Hmm.
did, I knew I needed to eat, but I
Yeah.
wasn't aware of how badly I was kind of neglecting myself. So
It is hard, and relationships specifically are incredibly challenging during those times.
yeah,
Um,
a lot of strain.
uh, I um, wish I could go back in time and and do it differently to support those that I had been in relationships with that had lost
Yeah.
someone, you know. Um, because we as the other person want so much for them to just be out of pain like quickly, like let's get you out of
Yes.
pain.
Because it hurts to
um
watch that too, like
it
as
does,
a person on
it
the
does it,
sidelines. Yeah.
it does. And then selfishly, like, we don't know what to do because now we're not doing all the other things that we normally do in this relationship, like go out and have fun or whatever. So for the people that are trying to, and I just want to say, like, it's, for the most part, like, these are all well-intended people
Absolutely.
that say those
Yeah.
things that kind of
Yeah.
annoy you or bother you. I think that the reason why saying something like, let me know if you need anything, is not helpful, it's because it's putting that burden on the griever, who
Yes.
already has like a million things that they're like thinking of. They don't know what, so now I have to delegate, now I have to come up with something for
Right.
you to do.
Hi. Lowest
um
on the priority list. Like
and
insane.
but again, those people, do they want to know what to do for you that would help you,
That's
but
actually helpful. Yeah.
you don't know, you don't always know. um
Yeah.
my go-to is always like, well, if I like pizza and Diet Coke, then just bring that to me,
That's a
don't
safe
ask,
bet.
just just bring it to me.
Yeah.
um but again, that just, it's such a hard dance because we don't know. And you know I think too, um it's important to check in with our friends and our loved ones, not just that one time right when we heard about the
Yes.
loss.
Oh my God.
Check in with them in a couple, a week, maybe a few days later, maybe like
Yeah.
a week later, 6 months later, a year later. um it's not something that, you know it doesn't just dissipate, it doesn't just like dissolve. So um but give them tangible things too. If you know that their favorite restaurant is this, would you like me to bring you this dish from this restaurant? Yes or no? That
Yes.
is a little easier for the griever, I think, because we can, in that moment, we can just say, how do I feel right now? Yes or no. Okay, no, or yes, that sounds great. You know,
Right.
um,
Exactly.
it's just, otherwise we have to scan our brains for all these different things, and it doesn't, like I was saying, it's just not helpful, because then we're trying to now I have to come up with something for you to do.
Yeah.
um but yeah, just like I said, like tangible things, like, would you like to go on a walk with me?
Yeah. That's an easy
It's,
yes or no. Yeah, they're
yeah,
just like, yeah, I could get some fresh air, or be like, nope, my couch sounds real good right now. Thanks so
yeah.
much.
Yeah, yeah, well, exactly, and that's the thing, you might say yes in that moment, but when it comes time to actually do it, you might
Yeah.
not want to, and that's okay too.
Yeah. Because it ebbs and flows. And what you want to commit to one moment might not feel good the day it actually comes, or even the moment it comes, even if it's like a couple hours later. I
Right.
mean, yeah, it is unspeakably hard to
Yeah.
live a normal life during grief. The really acute grief, I should
the
say.
life the life that the rest of society wants us to be living.
Yes. It's amazing how humans can survive like a really traumatic loss and
Yeah,
still, we're such a survival mode.
the workspace is hard to be in.
Yeah.
um I said to you before we started my joke about, I'll say it again.
Say it again. Yeah.
It goes, you go into work and you're at Chipotle. I don't know why I always use Chipotle for this.
It's a solid example.
You're working at Chipotle and you say, oh, my mother just died. Manager says, I'm sorry to hear that. You say, thank you. Manager says, you're coming in Monday though, right? We need coverage on Monday.
It's ridiculous. It's so true.
It's so bizarre. During the film, I interviewed Elisa Fornere of Pause organization, said there's a literal threshold here on the door. When you go beyond that threshold, you check your dead mom at the door
God,
when
yeah.
you come into work. And it was just so bizarre. And we talked about this, and I asked her, I said, so what is the, how, like, if you're looking at it from the employer's point of view for a moment,
Mm-hmm.
you want productivity, you want employees that are going to show up, and you want them to be productive, but humans have feelings and emotions, and they cannot always be productive. So it is incredibly challenging in the workspace, and I don't know, there isn't a just blanket answer for it. Again, you have to assess each situation individually. I do think there needs to be more compassion surrounding that. I don't, unfortunately, know what the answer is, because there isn't one,
Yeah.
because we don't know how we're going to feel um, in the midst of deep grief every day. Some people want to go back to work immediately. Some people try it and they realize that's not a good idea. And then some people perhaps never go back.
Because you touched on this earlier, and I actually want to ask you a question here in just a moment, but you interviewed and spoke with so many different types of people in this film that have experienced different types of loss. We're all going, of course, to experience that differently, but that's the beautiful thing about community too. And this is certainly what I try and build, is like, each of us cannot compare our own grief or our own losses, even if it's like the same, titled person, right? Mom, dad,
Mm-hmm.
sibling, child. But there are, I think, some kind of principles of grief, for lack of a better term. There are just some overarching emotions and things that we might feel. We might feel overwhelmed. We might feel really anxiety ridden. We might just feel that really deep, profound emptiness, whatever this feels like. And there's this kind of twisted bonding that I guess low-key trauma bonding, but that can happen with that. But it's the community aspect is such a beautiful thing, because especially if you don't have that in your everyday life, or you have a partner who hasn't experienced like a lick of loss, finding your tribe, so to speak, and just those people that, maybe they're not even super close to you. Maybe that's a benefit, actually, is that you have people in your life that, you're meeting in these various communities or a grief group or whatever it is, that kind of don't know you super personally, because it almost helps sometimes to get that sort of third party experience, or, you know, just a little session to vent or something, or just to raise your hand and be like, is anybody else feeling just completely overwhelmed right now? And just to have some people just
Yeah.
say, yes, just that simple, heck yes, I am too, can be so validating, especially again when we're surrounded by people that we just feel like maybe aren't getting it. Or that was the other, I think, shocking part for me, and we've touched on this a little bit, but it's like, you know, people that have, for example, also lost their parents or something, say to me, well, at least you had so many years with them. At least your dad was alive for 6 years with his cancer and he didn't die immediately. Those at least statements, I've talked about them before. It's one of those like very unhelpful things. But that
Well,
was
and you've
shocking.
probably already, and I'm sure you've already had those thoughts yourself. Like, well, yeah, of
Totally.
course, you're probably thinking like, well, yeah, of course of course I'm grateful for having my dad this long and not, you know, him dying sooner. But
What is that
take
solve?
that doesn't take the pain away. Like, I don't,
Yeah.
because like, what's the alternative? Like, he would have died when I was 5, or he would have, like, it's not.
Right.
And yes, it's like, I mean, of course, like, would you have rather had your father longer? Yes. Would you are you grateful that you had your father as long as you did? Yes.
Sure.
Would it have been perhaps worse? Most times the griever has thought that to themselves, and they're like, well, yeah, that's okay, maybe, but that's not changing how I feel about this situation. It's
Yeah.
not it's not helping me in this moment.
Yeah.
And that goes back to gratitude and grief. Like, people are so quick to rush us to gratitude, and we're over here grieving. And maybe at some point we can acknowledge that, like, the grief and the gratitude can coexist. I can be grateful for having that person in my life for so long, but I'm also in grief because they're not in my life
Yeah.
anymore. So
Right. Like,
yeah,
why
it's
can't that be acknowledged? Yeah. And it's like, and again, I know it's like well intentioned a lot of times, and
it is.
it comes from a place of people just wanting us to be better. But when it comes at the cost sort of acknowledging and just validating, like, yeah, this really freaking sucks.
You had said something else that reminded me of something we don't talk about a lot. It's like, you know, in grief, there are, getting back to community, there are people that you thought would be in your community that
Oh my God, yeah.
just, I don't, disappear. And then there are people that come out of nowhere that are
Yeah.
profoundly helpful.
Yeah.
And you're so grateful for those people. And they really, sort of step up, and are there for you. I mean, I've had a few people that, for lack of a better phrase, meet me where I am.
Yep.
And were just there with me. They were just there with me when I was
Yes.
sad, or when I was angry, or when I wanted to, like, yell and scream or do nothing, or, you know, binge eat. Like, they just allowed me to do all those things. They didn't try to rush me in or out of it. And that, I think, is helpful, um when those people that are there for you
Mhm.
allow you to be just the way you are in that moment.
Yeah. Just giving you grace, which then allows you to give yourself more grace, I think. And it's just this beautiful cycle of grace and
Mm-hmm.
acceptance and understanding. And I love what you just said about not rushing it, because I that's a lot of what we've been saying today is, I think, gets at that. It's just like this need for rushing to, still parent at 100%, to still work at 100%, to, live up to others' expectations.
Because how can you rush something that doesn't end, you know
Wow. Yes. That's wow. Okay. Quote of the day right there. I love that. Oh my gosh. All right. So really quick, just to kind of close out the film
Yeah.
conversation. There's a lot I want to talk to you about it, but I was curious, of all the people that you spoke to in this film, that were featured in this film, and there's a lot of very incredible and influential and just amazing people that you spoke with. Is there anything that stood out to you? And you don't have to, name one person in particular, but
Mm-hmm.
just kind of more concepts of things that really stuck with you, or things that they said, kind of like what you just said, that was just like kind of an aha moment, just very profound and very like, wow, that just nailed it when it comes to grief.
Well, yeah, I've said this one before. When I was talking to Anthony Rapp, he talked about how you mourn the loss of them,
Mhm.
but you're also mourning who you were to them. So that, he said that goes with them.
Mhm.
So your identity as a daughter has gone with your parents as they have gone out of your lives.
Yeah.
And it's not that you're not their daughter, you know. I don't want to speak for you, but
No,
um
that's how I feel. When if anybody calls me an orphan, by the way, which my own grandmother, my mom's mom, has called me an orphan on multiple occasions. And not to knock anybody who does consider themselves, I guess by definition, I am one. And maybe I have sort of like a Daddy Warbucks syndrome with Annie. And like the fact that I just like feel like abandoned in this orphanage, the word makes me just cringe a little bit. And then to have your own grandmother say it to you is very humbling. But
a
um,
full-blown adult
yeah,
orphan.
so
Yeah.
my grandma's she's an interesting one. But yeah, I mean that for me, it was just like, ooh, that hit home. That did not
Mm,
resonate with me whatsoever. But you are, and not sorry, not to interrupt you, but I was just gonna say you're absolutely right, in that your
mm,
identity shifts. It takes on new meaning, I guess.
yeah. Well, people don't, I mean, and you don't, yeah, it does. You don't think about it, but if there's a breakup, or like your identity as a spouse or a brother, or that all goes away. The relationship we had to them, like that all goes with them too. And so grief does change you. It changes your identity. And so, how do you move forward with that being part of you now?
Yeah.
That's the challenge. Like, how do we move forward with it? And it's going to look different for every single person.
There's just a new, I hate the term new normal after COVID, but there is a little bit of a new sense of normalcy that we have to find. And we do find it eventually.
Yeah.
We might take on new hobbies or interests or meet new people or have new experiences or travel or whatever it looks like, and it does not fill that specific void. That little hole in our heart might always be there, right? But it's, you're
Mm-hmm.
kind of there was this analogy I heard once, and I'm not going to explain it well, so I won't go into a ton of detail, but you're kind of filling in the gaps around it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a little less empty than it was the day before. And that's why I'm always preaching, baby steps and just taking it a day at a time, a moment at a time. And like what you were saying earlier, where about the 5 stages of grief, and you're just like, yeah, I felt all 5 of those this morning. It's
Oh yeah.
like, it is that volatile of a process.
Well, and even the griever can have moments where you're like, you know what? I accept this. And then boom, like 10 minutes later, you're like, no, I don't. What am I
Nope.
talking about? And
I don't
so
know what
it's
that
such
was,
a
but
it's yeah, no, not at all.
yeah.
And so that's why, it's important to acknowledge, like somebody says it in the film. Um they we talk about it. Of course I would be remiss if I didn't touch on the 5 stages in the film, but we talk about how it's almost like resignation would be a better term. Like you resign to it, that it's a
Oh,
fact,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
like because it's not
I like that.
acceptable to lose a loved one.
Right. Like, yeah, in what
so
world
so
would
I
anyone?
always look at yeah so I always look at it as that, like, well, maybe I can get to a point where I accept that this is a factual thing that had occurred in my life,
Absolutely.
and I am still living with it, and it will always be part of me.
I like that resign. And I know that maybe might have sort of a, I don't know, not a negative connotation, but sort of, it sounds a little, it might sound a little defeatist in a way, like, oh, I just resigned to but we are kind of resigning to the fact that like, okay, this is sort of like, this is my life now. But I feel like that's where I certainly am trying to, take my community. And I feel like this is where you're also going with this film, and in instilling this sense of meaning and love and hope and purpose. It's like, okay, we might have to like just kind of throw up our arms a little bit, resign ourselves to the fact that this is our life now. But what can you do with that from here? What opportunities can you create for yourself? Where can you now take this rock bottom that so many of us feel like we're at, and, by the skin of our teeth, kind of climb ourselves out of it a little bit. And that's where I know we've touched on gratitude a lot today. I think that's
Right.
definitely a part of it. And it's not being grateful they're gone. Again, this is very much like assuming this is a death of a person, but it's not necessarily always being grateful that like our identity has changed or whatever, but there is just
Right.
this really incredible like growth and these realizations and this new understanding for life and kind of like what it means can come from this darkness, right? So
Absolutely.
just the light is out there, for it not to sound super super preachy, but the the
It,
light is out
yeah.
there
Yeah.
for
And I
anybody
certainly,
who feels like it's
I
not.
yeah, I certainly don't want to, if anyone's listening that's in the midst of grief, I don't want people to think like if I'm not starting some big organization or
Oh god,
making a
yeah, no.
documentary that I'm doing anything wrong. Meaning is in us.
It's
It's
what you
what
make
it's
it.
yeah, and it's not. I would love and everyone to find meaning in their lives continually as they move forward in or out of grief.
Yeah.
Um, and if you're not making meaning or having a loss become a gain right in this moment, that doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong, and that doesn't mean you can't still find something meaningful
Yeah.
as you move forward. So just to have compassion for yourself and to allow space for just all of those emotions as they come up. I've found too that in grief and when things change in our lives, we can meet new people that we never knew existed,
Oh my
and
god, yeah.
have new relationships with wonderful, amazing people. And so we can kind of, in a sense, be optimistic that we don't know where this grief is going to take us,
Yeah.
and it could possibly introduce us to people that we did not know
Yeah.
um existed on this earth, and they could be better for us. So again, not replacing the grief,
Yeah.
but it certainly will shift our lives in a new direction.
Yeah, I mean, it's all part of the process. And I know I just want to acknowledge too, like I know that can feel overwhelming. Like that very idea could perhaps scare people too, like especially if you're a little, change adverse and don't like a lot of change, or you just like don't even want to like, you just are rejecting this idea of change right now. Again, depending on where anybody's in their grief. I know certainly in my earlier days no one could have told me to be grateful for anything, or that I would find and connect with wonderful people in this new community and people like you, and who knew, right? But that's the point. It's like, who
Mm-hmm.
knows? So just having that open mind to that, I think you just said it perfectly, just that optimism and whatever life could have in store for you.
Indeed.
Okay, I seriously could have chatted with Grant about this all day. I enjoyed this open conversation about grief so much, and I hope you did as well. If this resonated with you or any part of our talk today was impactful for you, I would love for you to let me know. DM me on Instagram at Losses Become Gains Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would so appreciate it if you shared it with someone that you know that could use it. Rate it on whatever platform you're listening on, and be sure to follow Grant's Film on Instagram as well at Meet Me Where I Am Film. This is all linked in the show notes, but I would love for you to follow so you can be the first to know and hear when this film is available to watch. You will not want to miss it. It was honestly so touching and so beautifully done. I cannot wait for you and the rest of the world to see it. I am sending you a huge thank you for tuning into today's episode, my friend. I'm so grateful you're here and for the steps you're taking to heal your heart, open your mind, fulfill your soul, learn, grow, and evolve, and move through this crazy thing called life in big, beautiful, impactful ways. Visit lossesbecomegains.com for my blog, more coping tools, ways to work with me, and so much more. And be sure you're following along on Instagram and Facebook at Losses Become Gains Podcast. I love seeing new faces, meeting new people, hearing your stories, and supporting you however I can. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. and share this episode or this podcast with someone who could use it too. And remember to always keep asking yourself, how will I turn my losses into gains today? I'll catch you in the next episode.